A statement declares itself false. If it is true, it must be false. If it is false, it must be true. No stable assignment is possible. This is before logic, a history of rules before they were written. A statement remains stable only as long as it does not refer to itself in a way that changes its own condition of truth. In certain early logical formulations, a single sentence was sufficient to disrupt this stability. This sentence is now known as the liar. One of the earliest direct forms of the paradox is attributed to Eubulides of Miletus, a philosopher associated with the Megarian school. The formulation is simple, a statement that declares its own falsity. If the statement is taken as true, then its content requires that it be false. If it is taken as false, then its content would be accurate, which would require it to be true. The statement cannot be assigned a stable truth value without contradiction. It produces oscillation. A related but weaker form appears in a statement attributed to Epimenides of Crete, often expressed as the claim that all Cretans are liars. This version does not generate the same structural instability. The contradiction does not arise unless the statement directly refers to its own truth condition. The stronger form emerges only when the statement includes itself within its own evaluation. The importance of this structure does not lie in its simplicity, but in the type of constraint it reveals. Earlier systems of reasoning, including those associated with pre-Socratic thought and early classification practices, relied on the assumption that statements could be evaluated against a stable external reference. A statement described a condition, and that condition could be compared against observation, definition, or shared rule. With the liar paradox, this arrangement no longer holds. The statement becomes its own reference. Self-reference of this kind does not require complexity. It requires only that a statement include itself within the conditions of its own evaluation. Once this occurs, the distinction between description and evaluation becomes unstable. The system is no longer comparing a statement to an external condition. It is attempting to assign a value to a statement that changes the conditions under which it is judged. This presents a structural problem rather than a semantic one. The paradox does not depend on ambiguity in language. Even when the formulation is made precise, the contradiction remains. The issue arises from the relationship between the statement and the system that evaluates it. When that relationship becomes circular, the system loses its capacity to assign stable values. The contradiction is not produced by error. It is produced by the structure of the statement itself. In Aristotle's syllogistic framework, propositions are evaluated through structured relations between categories. The system maintains a separation between the subject of the statement and the rules used to evaluate it. In related discussions in the metaphysics, Aristotle defends the principle that contradictory statements cannot both hold within the same framework of reasoning. The liar does not fit within this structure. It introduces a case in which the subject and the evaluative condition coincide. Later, logical traditions, including Stoic logic, developed more refined treatments of propositions and conditionals. These systems expanded the range of statements that could be analyzed. However, they did not fully resolve the instability introduced by self-reference. Ancient sources indicate that Chrysippus examined these paradoxes extensively, although only limited portions of those discussions survive. The significance of the liar becomes more apparent when it is considered as a boundary condition. It marks a point at which informal reasoning encounters a structural limit. The assumption that every statement can be classified as true or false does not hold in all cases. This does not invalidate the broader system, but it introduces a domain in which the system cannot operate without modification. In practical contexts, early reasoning systems often avoided such cases. Statements were constructed to refer to observable conditions, classifications, or relations that did not involve self-reference. The paradox did not emerge as a frequent operational problem. It appeared instead as a conceptual anomaly, identified through reflection on the structure of language and assertion. The historical record does not provide a unified account of how these paradoxes were interpreted in antiquity. Surviving texts suggest awareness of the problem, but not a standardized solution. Some treatments approach the paradox as a linguistic issue, others as a logical one. In many cases, the paradox was noted rather than resolved. It can be established with reasonable confidence that the paradox exposed a limitation in the assumption of universal evaluability. Not all statements can be assigned a stable truth value within a single system. If a system requires that all statements be assigned a truth value, the presence of self-referential statements introduces inconsistency. If the system excludes such statements, it imposes a constraint on what can be expressed. In both cases, the system must be adjusted. This adjustment did not appear in fully formalized form until much later developments in logic. However, the underlying pressure is already visible in antiquity. The paradox demonstrates that rules governing statements must account not only for external reference, but also for the internal structure of the statements themselves and their relationship to the evaluative system. The instability introduced by self-reference also affects classification and the organization of knowledge. When statements within a system can refer to the system itself, the boundary between object-level and meta-level descriptions becomes uncertain. This distinction was not yet explicitly defined in early traditions, and the liar operates within that ambiguity. The paradox appears across different periods and traditions. It arises in any symbolic system capable of making statements about statements. Once that capacity exists, the possibility of self-reference, and with it instability, follows. The extent to which ancient thinkers regarded the liar as a fundamental problem rather than a marginal curiosity remains unclear. The available sources do not record any systematic reconstruction of logic built around the issue. Its repeated appearance, however, indicates that it was recognized as a point at which ordinary reasoning no longer applied without modification. In this sense, the liar does not represent an error within logic. It marks a condition under which logic, as then understood, could not proceed without some form of adjustment to its expectations or its rules. The paradox does not resolve within its own terms. It does not produce a stable conclusion. Its role is to indicate that certain forms of expression generate conditions that existing rules cannot accommodate without modification. In the next episode, we will examine Aristotle's syllogistic system. This system establishes a structured framework for inference that avoids the instability introduced by self-reference.